Welcome to In the Furnace, where we talk about what's hot in music, and today we're going to be talking about the latest album from the Chainsmokers, titled Memories Do Not Open. At this point, I have no idea what to think of the Chainsmokers anymore. Gone are the days that they were just those two idiots that made Selfie back in 2014, and frankly, I kind of miss those days because now they've been dominating the pop landscape for way too long now. And sure, they made their comeback with Roses, the song that landed on my 2016 best list, and it belonged there. It's a great song. But everything since then has just not done the same thing for me at all. They put out the Collage EP, which to me was a very mixed project. It had Don't Let Me Down, which I like. I also like All We Knew, but for the most part it was just a very mediocre EP. So when I heard that they were coming out with a debut album, I was a little bit intrigued, especially since they were looking to get a little bit more personal, a little bit more honest. But at the same time, I was kind of cynical and not really looking forward to it at all because I knew that regardless of the quality, it would probably end up dominating the charts and be inescapable this year. So I dived into it, and what did we get? Well, if this album made me realize one thing, it's why Roses works so well for me. It's mainly because of the structure. Roses doesn't really follow a normal pop song structure. It has a first verse and a chorus, and then the drop, but then the drop just kind of evolves into more and more musical sections with not really any cohesiveness. It just keeps changing, making small little tweaks here and there. And frankly, I really liked that about Roses. It showed an interesting progression. It was something that we weren't really getting a lot of in pop music. And then the song decides to come back around for another chorus, which sounds different than the last one, then another drop, and then the outro, and it was just a really well put together song that didn't really follow any sort of formula, any sort of discernible rhythm, if that makes sense. But now it seems like almost every single song they put out just follows the same old tired formula: verse, chorus, chorus again, and then final drop that's bigger than the rest of the song and makes you think, oh, this drop is so good, I'm like floating, or whatever. The first example of this was Don't Let Me Down with Dea, which did have a pretty interesting progression, but it was the first of their songs to follow that formula, and by the time Closer came out, the formula was already tired. That final drop just didn't really do anything for me. But with very few exceptions, this is a formula that the Chainsmokers have been sticking with and milking to death, and it's prevalent a lot on this record. Take the lead single Paris as a prime example, a song that I can't even figure out why I like anymore, as every single quality about it is not very good, but I guess the whole is better than the sum of its parts. I don't know. The song follows, like I said, verse, chorus, final chorus, big build-up, final drop that's just like, whoa! And it's not even that good anymore because the final drop just feels like noise. It's not really doing anything. It was the songs that deviated from the formula that I appreciated on this record. The opening track, The One, is a great example of such, as it has a verse, chorus, just kind of building up and slowing down, only for the very end to have what I guess would be the drop with some sparky synths. I say sparky because it's basically the sound of when you turn on a gas stove. But still, it had a progression that worked. It wasn't really formulaic. I liked Andrew's voice on this song, which was a welcome change, as his voice is usually not very good. And I even liked the lyrics. They were sad, heartfelt, and we weren't really supposed to sympathize with Andrew, mostly just kind of look at him and be like, yeah boy, you done goofed, and in that context, it definitely works. The track right after it, Break Up Every Night, follows in a somewhat similar vein. There's not really a drop, except the ending is inevitably bigger than the rest of the song. Saw that coming, but it's not like a big thing here. I actually think Break Up Every Night has a pretty sweet sound to it. It's like the Chainsmokers take on electro-pop, indie rock type of sound, like what you would expect from like the 1975, and they tried blending some tropical synths in there, and it works weirdly well. It's a pretty enjoyable listen on that level, until we consider the fact that it's Andrew singing over this, and he goes for some higher notes at the end that he just cannot hit and sound good, and not to mention his vocals are mixed poorly. It's just unpleasant. And while these lyrics are more honest, I don't really know if I can give them a pass, because the closest comparison I can make to them is One More Night by Maroon 5, and yuck. But good thing thing the Chainsmokers decided to get those two sort of interesting tracks out of the way, because then we get back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back tracks that all follow their formula. The first one is Bloodstream, which I don't even know is worth mentioning except for the fact that I find Andrew's voice annoying. Using "yeah, I meant it" as the main line to say during the drop is a really dumb line. And, yeah, he goes for some high notes at the end that suck too. It's just a waste of time. Such a waste of time, in fact, that it's surprising that the two tracks right after it are actually kinda good. The first one being Don't Say with Emily Warren on vocals. And while this is a really pissy track, I would argue that the pissiness is kind of justified because Emily Warren is calling out this partner for being a piece of crap to her. This song basically counters the notion of using, "oh, I'm only human, I make mistakes," as an excuse for doing things instead of actually apologizing, with the main chorus line being, "don't say you're human, don't say it's not your fault." And honestly, it's kind of, I don't know, refreshing in that way, because we currently do have a popular song out right now that's the epitome of the "I'm only human" excuse, and it gets insufferable the more and more I think about it. So the fact that we get a song countering that from the Chainsmokers of all people, it's surprising. I would argue this is one of the better songs on the record, even though I think the production in the verses and in the drop don't really mesh well, even though I do like the drop, and the final drop isn't like that much more grandiose than the other ones, so it's not like a supreme example of the formula like Bloodstream was. So yeah, I actually give that song a pass. It's pretty good. But then it's followed by the best song on the record, and this is a surprise. Something Just Like This with Coldplay. I did a track review of it a few weeks back when it first dropped, and I thought it was pretty mediocre, but I don't know what happened, it just grew on me big time. A lot of that comes in the production. I didn't really give the drop enough credit. It's not directly imported from Roses. It's very similar. I can detect the similarities, but I've also been noticing the differences a lot lately. The pattern's a little bit different, and in the second half of the drop on Something Just Like This, a change comes in with an added layer of synth that makes it very different from Roses. And while this song does follow the formula, the final drop is actually really good, because instead of just layering on noise to make it feel bigger, they layer on a Coldplay guitar solo, and while it's not very inventive and a little bit repetitive, it fits with the drop perfectly, and it's just complete euphoria. Outside of a couple lyrical nitpicks here and there, this is a fantastic track. Wouldn't be surprised if I'll be talking about it again in December at this point, and that's honestly surprising given how mediocre I thought it was just a couple weeks back. It's a shame that such a beautiful track gets followed up by the two worst tracks on the record. First with My Type by Emily Warren, and her vocal performance here is not near as good as Don't Say. On that track, she was softer, and on this track, she tries going to be a bit more harsher, and she ends up sounding kinda like Dea. Compare Emily Warren singing the lines, "Yeah, you're just my type," with Dea singing the lines, "Where do the good boys go?" It sounds way too similar for it to be comfortable. These lyrics talk about being in a broken relationship and honestly give me really uncomfortable "I hate you, I love you" vibes. And the production here is really bad too. There's nothing to write home about in the verses, but then the drop is just so loud and blaring and comes out of nowhere. There's almost no build-up for it. It's basically just the sound of someone slamming their fingers on a piano. But in typical Chainsmokers fashion, it's all 7 chords. If you look throughout this album, you're going to find a lot of 7 chords, and that's not surprising given how they sound. The Chainsmokers have used it so many times at this point. The only thing I could really say I like about this track are these pretty little synths that come in the bridge, except for the fact that they were directly imported from Roses, and I can't win here, my gosh. What's not that much better is the track right after it, It Won't Kill You with Luann. She is such a non-presence on this track, she might as well not even be there. Not to mention the lyrics she's given are crap. "Come dance with me, it won't kill ya." It's the kind of annoying behavior that makes songs like No by Meghan Trainor seem almost justified. And no, the fact that this song is sung by a girl doesn't change anything. It's still really annoying. On a production level, this song is a complete and total mess, with some terrible percussion choices throughout, but the absolute atrocity comes in the drop, which sounds kinda similar to the drop in Don't Let Me Down, But, like, if that drop had smoked way too much weed, and then the Chainsmokers threw it in the song anyways. It's slower, it's duller, it's not near as lively, and it's frankly just a pain to listen to. The build-up brings up all this momentum, and the drop just completely kills it because it's not near as interesting or loud, even. Terrible song. I hope it doesn't get a single push, because it really doesn't deserve it. The other guests on this album are a bit more notable. Jhené Aiko on Wake Up Alone is a complete non-presence, but she does have some name recognition behind her, which is why I bring her up. And this track in general is just a mess. From the knockoff DJ Mustard synth line, the terrible percussion choices, the drop that sounds way too familiar for me to really give it credit. It's gotta be imported from somewhere else. And then the final drop, which sounds like something that belongs in a Kirby game, not even joking, only for the song to just remove that drop, basically, just to switch into this little slowed down segment that sounds absolutely terrible. It was not necessary, and it just makes the song even worse than it already was. The other notable feature is Florida Georgia Line on Last Day Alive, and frankly, that song is just there. It's adult contemporary schlock that doesn't really do anything for me. It sounds pretty. Florida Georgia Line fit way too well, and that's about it. The only tracks I really haven't touched on yet are Honest and Yun, the former of which is a complete mess, and the latter of which I actually enjoy quite a bit. Honest is kind of a deceiving song, as it uses this pretty sounding instrumentation matched with terrible lyrics, basically excusing all of his bad behavior on, well, hey, I'm being honest. Being honest does not give you a pass. You still wanted to cheat on your girlfriend, Andrew. Gosh, what is wrong with you? But really the main thing I got out of Honest was after he sings the line, if I'm being honest, there's this really awkward synth thing that they just shove in. I laughed out loud the first time I heard it. The last track I have to talk about, Yun, opens up with this pretty acoustic guitar that honestly sounds kind of fake. It's not the best thing ever, but it's passable. And then it meshes into an electronic rock song, and it works surprisingly well. It sounds really good. I'm fine with the lyrics that depict the troubles of being in a young relationship that's broken up, and he's kind of reflecting on it. It's a good coming-of-age track, if that makes any sense. And the bridge, they bring in vocoder vocals that were a really weird touch, but honestly fit pretty well. I was surprised by that. It's a pretty decent song overall. As a whole, I want to applaud the Chainsmokers for taking some risks, I guess. They didn't have to make an album, they didn't have to take this more personal route, and I will give them some credit there. But at the same time, the tunes aren't completely there. I will admit that this album is a grower. It was better the third time I heard it as opposed to the first and second. As someone who's always been kind of ambivalent to the Chainsmokers, there's only a couple tracks here I'll really be coming back to. Definitely Something Just Like This, though. That track is great. But for the most part, this is just kind of there, and I can't be bothered to care about it any longer. If you like the Chainsmokers, you're probably already loving this album. If you don't like the Chainsmokers, you're probably already ignoring or hating this album, which means that this entire review is pointless. Why do I do anything?